Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're talking about digital twins and the challenge of digitising the infrastructure sector in our bid to increase efficiency and boost outcomes from every pound of investment made. There is certainly no shortage of talk nowadays about transforming productivity and the way that the use of digital technology and data can improve the sector. And to date, the focus has been largely on improving our design and delivery functions, using tools to draw, design, plan, analyse, collaborate and share information more effectively. But in truth, and ever since we embraced the mandated use of building information modelling on public projects in 2016, we've known deep down that the bigger prize lies in digitising and boosting performance of the whole infrastructure system while in operation, which is where the use of digital twins comes in, enabling us to connect the physical world with the digital world, generating insights that drive decisions and interventions to help improve performance in the real world. And creating a national digital twin could enable better management and integration across the entire and varied built and natural environment ecosystem, reducing cost, carbon, and of course improving those vital outcomes for citizens. This bold concept was core to the work of the Cambridge University Subordinated Centre for Digital Built Britain in 2017, which morphed into various other programmes when it closed its doors after 5 years in 2022. And one of those initiatives is now known as the National Digital Twin Programme and run under the Department for Business and Trade. It is my pleasure, therefore, to be joined on the podcast today by Alex Luck, head of the National Digital Twin Programme, to update us on progress. Alex has been riding the digital wave throughout this time, and so I reckon we'll be well placed to explain where we've been, where we've got to, and more importantly, where she sees us heading in the future of infrastructure digitalisation. So, Alex, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Alex, digital twins. I mean, before we get into the why, let's start a bit about the what. Some definitions. The term digital twin seems to mean different things to different people. So how do you define a digital twin?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are lots and lots of different definitions of digital twin out there. In the department, across government, when we talk about digital twin, what we mean is a physical asset system or process with a digital model of that physical asset, and then a two-way flow of information from the physical into the digital, and then ultimately from the digital into the physical. So,
I mean, you use the word model. What makes a digital twin different from a BIM model, which of course is based on drawings and graphical representations of reality? What makes it different?
I suppose really it is that two-way flow of information. So it allows then you to start simulating in the digital world what could be done in the physical world to optimize that asset system or process, and then to allow the digital to exert that element of control over the physical world. It differs from a control system in the fact that you must be able to have separation between the physical and the digital. So if something happens to the digital twin, the physical asset keeps going, keeps performing. But obviously what you can start to do is really optimize that performance and sweat as much as possible out of the asset. So it's really about how we can do that far better.
Right, so it's all about data. So I suppose the question is, can a digital twin exist without a BIM model, without a graphical representation, or are they inextricably linked? Is one dependent on the other?
No, because when we talk about a digital model, I think with BIM we talk about that 3D model. So the 3D model of the asset with information associated with that model. With a digital twin, we don't necessarily have to have a 3D representation of the asset itself. I mean, it could be a number of different types of digital models. So it's really about understanding what is the right form of engaging with the information that flows from that physical environment for different users and for the way that is going to be best for optimizing the performance of that asset or process.
That's an interesting, because I think, when people talk about or think about national digital twins, you go to the sort of the computer gaming kind of virtual world, the metaverse, etc. But in reality, it is about really engaging using that data.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very tempting to get carried away with a really sort of sexy element of digital twin, and that's what we tend to think about. But we need to really appreciate that there is obviously a cost associated with being able to gather data, to be able to process it, etc. So, and obviously to be able to store it. So, let alone then starting to push that through all of these different types of visualization tools. So we need to really understand that cost benefit ratio and ensure that we are applying the right tools to the problem that we are trying to solve. So not overcooking it and getting carried away by, I want a digital twin because that sounds exciting and therefore I want one. Actually start with the problem and then work out what are the right tools for you to be engaging with that information.
I mean, heaven forbid that the infrastructure sector should overbake that problem. But anyway, you run the National Digital Twin Programme. So what is that? What is the National Digital Twin? And what is the programme doing to make it a reality? You're not creating this metaverse. You're not creating some big digital game. What are you doing?
Right. So the National Digital Twin is not a giant digital twin of everything in the UK, because frankly, that would be utter madness. It's really about that ability for people to connect the digital twins that they require for their particular use cases. So that ability to start sharing across organizational boundaries and even more challenging across sectorial boundaries, recognizing that if we are going to solve some of the really big challenges we have at the moment, it's not going to be solved by one sector alone. We need to really get much better at understanding that interconnectivity and interdependency between sectors, between systems. What the National Digital Twin Programme is there to do is really create the underpinning rules of the road that will facilitate that ability to connect those digital twins together. So we're here really to develop the standards, the guidance, the frameworks, policies and tools that will enable that, and to ensure that digital twins individually and when connected are appropriately safe, secure and trustworthy, that they're also ethical, sustainable, adaptable over time and really importantly interoperable.
So I suppose just to simplify that, it's about making sure that if a water company or the water sector wants to link its data modelling to the national highways modelling or to network rails or to HS2s or to a local authority's air quality monitoring system, then the data can actually all interact with each other.
Exactly, because we have a real challenge about when we send data to another organisation, the chances that it means the same to that organisation when it arrives as it did when, and it's in their systems as it did when it left the existing system, really, really difficult, really remote chance that that's actually going to be the case. And you look at that interdependencies, for example, you said about the water sector, you look at the interdependency with the power sector and actually being able to understand when there are likely to be droppages in power, which may trigger an issue in terms of a water pumping station, so a switch tripping, etc. We need to start understanding these interdependencies better. So if we're going to be able to do that, we need to ensure that the information is interoperable.
And we'll talk a bit more about interoperability a bit later on, but effectively what this is ultimately doing is building that vital resilience into the national infrastructure.
Exactly. So it will allow us to start ensuring that our assets are better able to cope with the challenges that we are facing now, let alone the challenges that we will undoubtedly be facing in the future, dealing with those big challenges around things like net zero, sustainability going forwards, etc.
Which, of course, as I saw, it was one of the real kind of benefits or drivers for the Centre for Digital Built Britain when it was launched in 2017. It was trying to bring all these elements together, obviously boosting efficiency, but also building resilience, reducing carbon, but also reducing cost. What did that achieve, and why is the centre no longer needed?
So I think, the centre was very much involved in BIM as well and sort of taking that forward after the release of the mandate. And then they also started working on the sort of the digital twin aspect following the publication of the report Data for the Public Good. So I think what CDDB was very good at doing was really driving that vision, starting to get people enthused, excited about the concept of digital twins and the benefit they would bring. what we then needed to be able to really start to move on to do was to, once we've got that passion, that enthusiasm, was really to start thinking about how do we move the needle? How do we get from where we are to where we need to be? Because we can't keep just talking about vision and expect everything else to happen. So the decision was made that we would bring the programme back into the department and we would really focus on that change that was needed. So looking at how we can do this in a way that allows any organisation to come and participate. So looking at low barrier to adoption, true scalability, etc., and making sure that we put those rungs of the ladder in place, if you like, as to how people can move through this process at a pace at which they feel comfortable.
Because, government has got many digitally based programs. Digitisation is central to the Infrastructure and Projects Authority's Transforming Infrastructure Performance Programme in Cabinet Office. There are many other digital programs that are going on, whether it's around AI in Cabinet Office. How does the National Digital Twin Programme link with all the other stuff that's going on in the world of government?
Yeah, so we do really try and keep linked up as much as possible. So we are very linked up with the AI programs that are going on across government, because again, what AI is going to be very heavily dependent on is the availability and quality of data. And that is one of the big things that the National Digital Twin Programme is looking at. With regards to IPA, obviously the Transforming Infrastructure Performance documentation refers to digital twins coming down the track at us, and the importance of information management. Again, two things that are, very much within the bailiwick of the National Digital Twin Programme. It's obviously always a challenge with government is sort of keeping in touch with all of the work that is going on. But we do work very closely, for example, with Department for Transport, with the Ministry of Defence. We're also working closely with Cabinet Office and a number of other bits of government around this challenge and getting them engaged in the work that we're doing. So it's a long, hard slog, understandably, because government is huge, but I think we're sort of really gaining some traction now with the programme, and that's really good to see.
Which, of course, leads me on to the next part of the question, which is the why. Why are we trying to digitise infrastructure? What is the advantage as you see? I mentioned, quite a few of those, reducing costs, reducing carbon, boosting outcomes. Is that what it's all about for you? What's your driver? What's your measure of success at the programme?
I think it will be whether we can demonstrate that these tools and processes can deliver benefit to, obviously, to government, but also to business. It's really important that businesses do see benefit from this, and to society, and obviously to the environment as well. So and we are really rigorous in the programme about measuring the benefit of everything we do and looking at the true cost of everything that we do as well. So we do sort of carbon calculators on every tool that we use as well, so that we really understand that cost benefit ratio. But I think it's really important because we cannot build solely what we are going to need in the future. And even what we do build, we are going to have to maximize those assets to the full. So we have to be able to better understand limitations, performance, when we need to intervene and how we intervene in those things. But we also have a vast array of legacy assets that we need to be able to maximize their potential as well. And in fact, the majority of the assets we will have in the future probably already exist. So there's this huge piece around actually how do we not only do the easier bit, if you like, which is the sort of digitalization of new assets, but the much harder problem about actually how do we digitalize the existing infrastructure and assets that we have in order that we can really drive the performance of those and understand how we best manage and maintain those going forward to deal with the sorts of challenges that we're going to have, particularly around things like resilience. Because
there are huge parallels when you think about it between where we are now as an economy and when it all, where we were in 2010, 2011, when it all kicked off with the government strategic decision to mandate the use of BIM on public projects, because that was all about reducing the costs, trying to get more for less. And it was a huge driver for change. and came about, when the government realised that it had to actually, it didn't have enough money to do everything it wanted to do. So how far have we got since then in terms of digitisation and in terms of boosting that efficiency and getting that better bang for our buck?
Yes, I think it's difficult. So I think there's some really good projects where it's been used very successfully. I think the biggest challenge we have around it actually is that's not universal. It's still hard to do. And I think it's hard for client organizations to really understand and specify what they want. So I think that certainly puts challenges in the way. And certainly when you start moving away from sort of more central government or those big infrastructure or construction programs, you don't see the same sorts of technologies and processes being used. And I think for those projects as well, can we really demonstrate that cost benefit ratio? I suspect we'd struggle more with that. And the more, I suppose, this becomes business as usual, the easier that will become. So I think, what the part of what the National Digital Twin Programme is really doing is focusing on some of those users with lower technical resource available to them and understanding, well, actually, how do we ensure that they can benefit from this as well? What is that actually going to take? Because I think if we really want to move the needle on this, we have to have that sort of honest conversation about just what it's going to take to ensure that everybody can get involved and participate in this.
What was the phrase I use, and I know it's a phrase that you hate because I've put it to you before, but this life after BIM, and I would say it could be seen as going, and bear with me on this, going from digitising to digitalisation to digital twins. I mean, is it an evolution that you kind of recognise there? BIM will survive. BIM is there for quite a specific purpose, and that is not removed by having digital twins. You can have BIM with digital twin and without digital twin. And I think this idea, BIM is dead, long live digital twin is wrong, because there's still huge benefit from going through those processes that are set out in the standards that are built into government requirements around procurement. Those will still really drive benefit. They can do a lot in terms of particularly that sort of procurement, the design, the construction phase. I think where we've struggled more with BIM is in that operational phase. And I think that, yes, that's probably the space that digital twin comes into more. I mean, it obviously does exist in the sort of design and construction phase as well. But the two things will coexist. They are very much two solutions that can be used either together or separately. Because I suppose the reality is that while I may talk about life after BIM, there's an awful lot of the industry that hasn't actually got to BIM yet, and that's the point you make there.
Well, exactly. And digital twins will do something different from what BIM does. Yes, they're both reliant on that information requirement. That is the thread that joins them, but they've got different functions. Yeah.
Well, we talk about BIM, but of course we're now hearing a huge amount about the growth of open BIM. Trying to make systems more interoperable. You mentioned it earlier, less dependent on proprietary software vendors. How do you see that future evolving, and how do you see the vendors fitting into this whole world of national digital twins?
So I think it's really important. I mean, we focus on things being open as much as possible. So I think it is clearly really important. I think what we need to make open are those underpinning bits, if you like, that industry is generally less interested in working on. So I think that underpinning process for how we make information interoperable, I'm not convinced that's a problem that industry would solve on its own. And I think where industry will always do really well is around the tools that sit on top and consume that information. And that doesn't necessarily need to be open source, but we do need to make sure as much as possible that things are interoperable. So how do we do that? Especially if we are ultimately to get to a national digital twin where we would be able to connect these things up. But it's about understanding what is the drivers for people to do that? How do we do that? How do we ensure that eventually, ultimately as well, there is a sort of functioning market in this space? That's really important to drive this forward. So it's always that balance between, ensuring that we can make things interoperable, that those underpinning elements are are as much open so that they are accessible to people and we avoid that vendor lock-in, but that still you have businesses able to make money out of this.
Well, we'll see. It's certainly a lot of water to flow under that interoperability bridge to come, that's for sure. Alex, let's talk a bit about you. I think it kind of sets the context for what we're trying to achieve here, because you're a chartered engineer, fellow of the ICE, fellow of the CIHT, but you've got a huge expertise in security-minded approaches to the built environment and infrastructure, risk management and safety. Is that why you've ended up so enmeshed in digital systems? That security element of it.
I suppose, yes, that was the starter for me getting more involved in this. So I started really through getting a little bit more involved in BIM and then starting to see some of the challenges that are around. Well, clearly there are huge benefits to making that information more readily available, but there are also challenges around that as well. And we need to be mindful about making too much information available can then ultimately be used to compromise an asset. So it's about that balance and understanding what we really do need to protect, what is sensitive and what is something that there is more opportunity than risk associated with it. So that got me sort of involved. And then as I was involved in that sort of capacity with Centre for Digital Built Britain, and it's just sort of really grown from there. It's not a place I necessarily ever expected I would end up, but that's still fun. And I really, really enjoy having the opportunity to run this programme. And it's fantastic. It's absolutely fascinating. And it means I get to work with some really incredible people. Really incredible people.
Well, clearly security and risk management is central to the development and management of digital twins. You mentioned it, particularly for nationally critical infrastructure, protecting it from, making it available to the good guys, but keeping it safe from the bad actors. You're also a member of the Register for Security Engineers and Specialists. Are we on top of this issue of security?
Not as on top as I think we should be. There is no doubt. It's always that balance. And I think what we don't want to do is frighten people off from using these sorts of technologies because, we see danger around every corner. But we do need to be aware of what some of the security risks are. And we need to be thinking about where we need to be applying security and where we can be a little bit more relaxed about it. So I think it's getting people to go through that process is the challenge that we have, and making a proactive decision rather than, something happening and then people reacting to it, or getting quite far down the line and then thinking, oh, yes, maybe we should have given some thought to security in this because I'm a bit worried about that now. So it's really just about supporting people to go through that process and think about it, and thinking about sort of security up front, sort of as default, if you like. So I always encourage people, start off with the basis of everything's going to be secure and then take things away, rather than thinking, we'll start with everything open and add security on.
Well, it's interesting. I spoke to Chetan Couture from Lang O'Rourke, whose background is in electric vehicles and Polestar. And of course, there was a program I listened to on the radio recently around the amount of data which is potentially becoming gathered by electric cars and where does that all go? If it's owned by the Chinese, then where does that all go? You say we're not thinking harder. Should I be worried? Should we be worried about the work that your team are doing there, which is setting us up for a fall later down the road?
So this is why everything we do. I talked earlier about digital twins individually and when connected needing to be having appropriate levels of security. So that is a really fundamental requirement of everything we do, is looking at that whole issue around what do we need to protect and how do we protect that? So again, we think about security, about the individual technologies, and digital twin obviously isn't a technology in itself, rather it's an amalgamation of technologies. So one of the things we're going to have to think about is actually, we might understand what we need to do around security of sensors or what we need to do around security of cloud, etc. But actually, what happens when we start bringing these things together? And how do we make sure that the system as a whole has that appropriate level of security that's going to be required? So we will not, especially as government, we really have that at the forefront of our mind, and everything we do has that security thread woven in. But ultimately, again, it's down to how people use them, and people will need to apply them taking into consideration that security as well. So part of what we do is not only that sort of technologies piece, but all of that sort of operating frameworks, the processes around them, so that we are providing guidance to people on not just what they should be doing, but how they should do it. And I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the really valuable lessons that we've taken from the BIM program, was we need to get much better at explaining to people how they do things if we expect them to do them well.
Well, clearly, Alex, you know more than most about cybersecurity. And is that why you've got a noticeably light digital footprint? I mean, there is very little about you and your background online. Is that deliberate? Should we be learning from you there?
Oh, wow. I mean, I've just never really been into social media. And then I suppose when the whole, I started getting more involved in security, I suppose I thought, well, that's possibly not altogether a bad thing. I suppose I'm just quite a private person, and I like to have a sort of separation between my personal life and my work life. And I don't necessarily want to be telling everybody in the world what I'm doing at any one time. So that's just, I suppose, an element of who I am. I think there's always that need. We do probably need to be more aware about just how much we're putting out there. Sitting in an airport and posting the fact that you're just about to go on holiday when you've also posted information about where you live seems to me a rather bizarre thing to do. But so I just think we need to be far more mindful, actually, of, it's not just every individual thing we put out there. It's when you start bringing that together, the information about our pattern of life is huge. And I don't think we've necessarily been that aware of that, or, we need to be more. But I think, we are at that time when the sort of generations that are coming up behind, they've lived with this all their lives. It is going to be very difficult. And we probably need to be thinking more about how we educate people, at schools, about what they need to be thinking about when they put everything out onto social media.
So tell us a bit that we couldn't find on the Google search then. What do you do when you're not at work? What would you put on your Facebook profile if you had one?
I work quite long hours on the programme, so anything, frankly, that I do outside work is not involving a laptop. So I try and get away from computing as much as possible when I'm not working. I love being outside. I live in a rural area, so it's really nice. I'm able to get outside a lot, and I garden and I walk and do lots of things outside. So very, very different from sitting at a desk or sort of travelling, which I do a lot for the programme. Okay,
right. Well, I will mull over my own social footprint from now on and try and take some Alex lessons on there. Back to digital twins, though. We hear a huge amount about the need to embrace this systems approach to infrastructure, breaking down silos. I mean, do you agree? And what does it look like in reality? How do we use these digital systems to break down silos?
I think, yes, I absolutely agree. We do need to be breaking down those silos. As I said earlier, some of these really big challenges we are going to have will need those silos to be broken down. I think the challenge is that, well, we can sit there and say that, yes, wouldn't it be great if everybody shared information? There is no doubt sharing information costs money. So we have to think about and be able to really demonstrate the benefit, not only to the receiver, which often happens when you share information, but also to the provider of that information. So a lot of what we do in the demonstrator program is really about understanding what those benefits are and how do we get people engaged. And I think really one of the valuable lessons we've learned is that starting small. Just doing something, even with some open data, and starting to use that to get people engaged, again, very much at a pace at which they feel comfortable. So not going and saying, right, we'd like you to share all of your information and trust us, great things will happen. It's about starting and saying, well, we've done this so far with this problem. So, for example, we did some work around resilience, understanding interconnectivity and interdependency between assets, just using open data, getting that in front of people in a way that they'd never seen it before. Started to get them to say, well, actually, that would be really good. What would happen if we also brought in? And that's an amazing way of actually getting people involved, getting their buy-in, getting their enthusiasm. But they're driving how quickly you move. And that's been a great way, actually, we found within the program of starting to break down those silos, getting people into the same room, talking, and sort of having that cooperation about, well, actually, if we did this and you did that, well, what would be the benefit if we brought that together?
Mm-hmm. We have to also touch on artificial intelligence today? I mean, not least given your cybersecurity background. I mean, I think it's given that it will help accelerate technology impacting infrastructure. But is it a threat? Or should we be embracing? How do you see the challenges ahead? Is it simply a fast route to more problems?
There's no doubt it is a threat, but it's also a benefit. So it's like anything. It's about how we use it and how much we understand it. I think at the moment we're in that, again, we're very excited. There's lots of people exploring the sorts of benefits that AI could bring. And I think I would always urge that just slow down a little bit, maybe understand more, think about things, and let's not just charge ahead with it. But I think rightly used in the right way, thinking about things like ethics and the sort of the data quality, the data availability, what we can do with that, what data is being used. I think, ultimately, yes, it will bring significant benefit. I don't think it's going to put us all out of a job. I think it will be about how we use it to support what we do and how we do it better, and probably removing some of those really tedious tasks that people don't enjoy doing. So I think it's just being sensible about how we do it and maybe spending more time understanding rather than getting too carried away about what it could do.
Because we're also seeing this new world of sensors and remote data gathering and feeding these AI analysis tools. If that's the future, where do you see the risks? Are we moving to a world of, we've all seen the Terminator movie. Is that something we should be fearing?
Goodness. I don't think we should be fearing that. I always think we need to be mindful about what are we actually trying to do? And as I said, sometimes just applying the brakes a little bit more. It clearly has huge power for us to do things a lot better and to really, manage things that we need to be managing if we're going to preserve the planet and preserve the lives we want to be able to live and also to be able to improve the lives of countless others. We need to be thinking about how we can do that. And I think all of these technologies and processes will help with that. But we can get carried away, and we need to think about actually some of these we could end up generating vast amounts of carbon from a lot of these technologies as well. So it's always that balance between, they all come with negatives as well as positives, and we just need to make sure we really understand them and balance those things. But no, I don't think we necessarily need to be worrying about sort of a world in which Terminator exists.
Okay.
Not at the moment anyway.
So if Terminator is not your vision, what is your, just to wrap us up, just, give us your vision for the future of digital infrastructure. I think
appropriate information gathered and being processed in a way that meets different user needs and allows us to really optimize assets and deliver benefit to society. And I think it's always about why are we doing this? What is the benefit we are really providing? And I think the sort of benefit to the society and to environment are two of the really key ones that we need to be thinking about. But actually, it should mean that we use less resources ultimately, that we are able to preserve the resources that we have for longer, the assets that we have for longer, that we're able to provide a better quality of living for people, better healthcare, all of these things that ultimately, if we can use our assets more wisely, we will be able to achieve, we should be able to achieve. And I think ultimately, if I could see some of that and I start to see some of that with the work we're doing, I think it's a really exciting future and something I hope that will really benefit people widely.
So, final sell for the program. How does the National Digital Twin Program help deliver that vision?
I think because we are really focused on delivering those underpinning rules of the road to ensure that we do this in the right way. And I think having something central to do that is really, really important. So it doesn't turn into the Wild West, but that we have that really strong base and understanding about how we really want to deliver this and how we do this right. So I think that's the role that the program is there for. And if it does that, and that means that we are able to use these in a way that meets all of those requirements around safety, security, ethics, etc., then that will be really, really incredible. And I would be very proud of the work that everybody in the program has done to achieve that.
as you say, Alex, it is a very exciting time, a very huge amount of challenges that are going in there. So thanks for sharing your thoughts on this National Digital Twin Programme today. And thanks for joining me on the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much.
Well, I will go away now and review my social media policy and work out exactly what my footprint is doing. But thanks, Alex. That's all we've got time for right now today. But we've got more on the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background links to some of the issues discussed today and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share with colleagues. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Alex, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.